Good afternoon. Welcome back to Passion World Talk Radio, a wholly owned subsidiary of Global Media Network LLC. Educate, enlighten, entertain. This is an opinion as an intro to today's program on Lest We Forget History. There's an old phrase, how the mighty has fallen. When a leader who once seemed untouchable loses power, history tells us that the shockwaves don't stop at his border. Other leaders, especially those who model themselves after him, start to feel the tremor under their own feet. And if I were a political figure who had built my style, my tone, or my public persona by mimicking somebody else's playbook, I might start questioning whether following that path blindly is still wise. The lesson might be lost on the one doing the imitating, the blind dog, as some commenters put it, but it won't be lost on the institutions around him. The military notices, ICE, ICE notices, cabinets notice, because institutions don't follow personalities. They follow stability. And when a major figure on the world stage falls, every institution and every allied nation quietly recalibrates. That's why Oberon's loss matters, not because of who he was, but because of what his fall signals to those who believed they were standing on the same kind of ground. So in this episode of Lest We Forget History, we're going to be talking about birthrights and the lists we fear. When we talk about birthrights, we usually think of something simple, something inherited, something guaranteed, something that belongs to you because you were born here in this country under this Constitution. But history has a way of reminding us that birthrights are fragile, not because the people lose them, but because the government sometimes decide to redefine them. And when governments start redefining who belongs, they often start making lists. In the early 1930s, Hitler didn't begin with death camps. He began with lists. Lists of undesirable, lists of enemies of the state, lists of people who were suddenly recast as threats, not because of anything they'd done, but because of who they were. The brown shirts enforced those lists. The Gestapo expanded them. And by the time the world understood what those lists meant, it was already too late. These lists didn't start with violence. They started with language. Words like dangerous, subversive, enemy, terrorist. Once a government labels a group as a threat, the public is conditioned to accept whatever comes next. Recently, commentators have raised concerns about political rhetoric in the United States, rhetoric suggesting that certain Americans, critics, journalists, or political opponents might be treated as threats or terrorists. The article you saw, and many of you have probably also read it, the one circulating on MSN, is an opinion piece, not a report of an actual government program. But the fear that is expressed is real for many people, not because of what is happening, but because of what history has shown can happen when leaders start talking about citizens, their citizens, as enemies. When a leader says, these people are dangerous, or these people are the problem, or these people are destroying the country, the next step is often a list. And once a list exists, the question becomes, who gets added next? Birthright citizenship is one of the clearest, simplest principles in American law. If you are born here, you are a citizen, period. Is protection against exactly the kind of political targeting that defined the 1930s in Europe. Because when governments can decide who counts and who doesn't, when they can decide who is loyal and who is dangerous, when they can decide who belongs and who doesn't, their birthright stops being rights. They become permissions. Mother, may I? That's why this conversation matters. Not because we're living in 1933, we are not, but because history shows us how quickly democracy can slide when leaders begin dividing citizens into real or not real, safe and dangerous, patriots and enemies. So what is history telling us? Well, the brown shirts didn't look dangerous at first. They were volunteers, helpers, protectors. They were framed as the people who would restore order. But their real job was to enforce the list. And the Gestapo, they didn't begin as a secret police force. They began as state security office, a bureaucratic tool, a paperwork machine. The danger wasn't the uniforms, it was the classification. Once a government decides that certain citizens are threats, the machinery of the state begins to move, slowly at first, then with terrifying speed. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, and the rhyme always begins with a list. So when commentators worry about terrorist lists or about political rhetoric that paints entire groups of Americans as enemies, they're not predicting the future. They're remembering the past. Birthrights exist to prevent governments from deciding who counts. They exist to protect the people from the state, not the other way around. At the moment, a leader suggests that some Americans are less legitimate than others. The moment critics become threats. The moment dissent becomes terrorism. That's when we must remember the lesson history carved into stone. Democracy doesn't collapse all at once. It collapses one list at a time. This is Lest We Forget History. I'm Elizabeth Cauldwell, alias Lillian Cauldwell. And birthrights only matter if we defend them.